Hey guys, welcome to episode 234. Joining me today, columnist from the Detroit Free Press, Nancy Kaffer, and constitutional law professor and author and speaker, our friend, Professor Eric Segall. I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hey, first things first, tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, Zoom Hangout. If you're a subscriber, join me and a whole bunch of others as we connect and chat and talk about everything that we are dealing with. It's always a good time. We always have a good time. So that is tonight at 8 Eastern on Zoom. Hope to see you there. I don't have an elaborate opening here for you with all the news and audio clips I normally do. I've been doing these really, I think, good openings with a lot of news and information. And today I ran out of time, was emotionally exhausted, and I just didn't want to wing it tonight as I'm putting the podcast together, especially because I have two awesome guests joining me on the show today. I had an over hour-long conversation with Eric Segall, which I really hope that you'll listen to and give me feedback on. It was wide-ranging. We covered a lot of ground about religion and race and even violence and when it's appropriate, if ever. It was great, as always, with Siegel. And before that, coming up right now, I've got a conversation with Nancy Kaffer, who is absolutely brilliant. She's a columnist opinion columnist at the Detroit Free Press. And, of course, everybody probably knows a little bit about what happened last night in Detroit, in Wayne County, where the two Republican electors tried to just throw out the votes of hundreds of thousands of black voters in Detroit. And I've had an emotion that I wanted to share, and I talk about it with Eric Segall, but I wanted to get your take on it. I have never condoned violence or supported violence of almost any kind outside the obvious kinds of self-defense. And even that, I need your hypothetical specific scenario to see if I would agree with it. But I mean, if you break into my house, for example, I don't necessarily have to fight you. I can just be like, dude, just take whatever you need and get out. Please just don't hurt anybody. But obviously, if you're, hurting my child, I'll tear your throat out. Matter of fact, the last time I was violent with another person was when this kid was hurting my daughter. They were 3-4 years old, playing in a park in New York City, and this little boy threw sand in my daughter's eyes, and she was screaming, crying, and I just snapped, and I grabbed him by the back of the head, and I just buried his face in the sandbox, and I just held it there, and I would pull it up, and he'd be like, ah! He had sand all over his face, and I'd bury it back into the sand, and I'd pull it up and let him breathe, and he'd be like, ah! Okay, sorry. That, too, was just a violent fantasy. It didn't actually happen, in case anybody was wondering. I'm not against all violence, just most violence. But last night, when I heard that news, I originally had a flip answer. I think I didn't fully understand. I was like, calm down. They're not going to take the vote. But then as I understood it more and I heard from more black folks on Twitter who were telling me, you calm down. I mean, don't stop telling us to calm down. Or something more articulate than that. I don't think they said you calm down, but I'm not making my point very well. See, I'm telling you, I'm tired. The point is, the idea that they would take people's votes, especially black folks who fought so hard to get the vote and to keep the vote for generations in this country. I thought, you know what? Burn their houses down. Burn those people's houses down. Slash their tires. I don't know. I mean, if they had gone through with that, I would not have blamed people for committing violence. I would want to commit violence if you stole me and all of my neighbors' votes. But what's left if you can't vote? If this is naive, if this is stupid, if this is immoral, I would really love to know what you think. I would. I've never felt this. This is new, and it's a scary emotion. I don't like it. I don't even like that anything remotely close has paid me a visit in this way, these emotions. I don't like flirting with them, and I'm uncomfortable with it. So I'm glad I said it in the microphone and that you got to hear it, and I'd love to know what you think about it. I'm glad that's not what happened in Michigan, and cooler heads, smarter heads prevailed in the end. And I hope it doesn't happen. But obviously, the powder keg is bubbling between what's happening with the aftermath of the election, that Donald Trump is still the president, and first and foremost, that COVID is running rampant all over this country, and many people just don't care. This idea that they're closing schools before bars and restaurants is preposterous, I think, probably to a lot of us, maybe most of us. I mentioned Dr. Aaron Carroll's piece in the New York Times about that. So, yeah, I don't have a lot of data here at the opening or any sound or anything to play for you because it's been just an exhausting day. I'll get back at it tomorrow when I've got great guests. Celeste Headley, Liz Winstead, and Christian Finnegan are all scheduled for tomorrow's show. But today's show, is I'm super proud of it because Siegel, my conversation with Eric Segall, I think was really great, and I'm certainly hoping to hear your feedback on it. But my conversation coming up right now with Nancy Kaffer is super important. She's a very, very smart columnist from Detroit, who rather lives in Detroit and writes for the Detroit Free Press. She is on Twitter at Nancy Kaffer, Kaffer. And she writes about all kinds of politics and policy issues. Michigan is such an important state, and trying to understand it was what I was doing, and she did a great job at helping me. So here now is my conversation with Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press. All right, I got her. She's been a long time one of my favorite columnists. And, of course, I've got roots in Michigan because that's where my wife is from. And there's a ton to talk about with the always brilliant columnist Nancy Kaffer from Detroit Free Press, who I just told you all about, joins me now. Nancy, I'm so glad that you were available. Psyched to have you on the show.
Always my pleasure, Pete. Thank you.
Oh, so much craziness in your state. What is it with Michigan? How do you explain Michigan to people who don't have roots in Michigan in terms of its politics? Because it's like New York State, my state a lot, and then it's got some big cities, but it's also got some really rural areas and lakes. And how do you explain it real quick?
Well, so I live in Detroit, where the spectrum starts at mainstream Democrat and goes left to personal property ownership is immoral. So we don't really have a right wing of the spectrum here in Detroit. And then the rest of Michigan, though, yes, it's even the Detroit suburbs, it's not the same. There's, like you said, rural communities. There's far more conservative enclaves, particularly on the west side of the state where Grand Rapids is, the stronghold of, you may be familiar with the DeVos clan. And there's just a really diverse political landscape here. I think there are more Democrats in Michigan. We've struggled with a very gerrymandered legislature and congressional map. So we have more people consistently vote Democrat here, but we still have a significant Republican representation in the Congress, and then our state legislature is dominated by Republicans. But we have a Democratic governor because, again, more people vote Democratic. We just recently passed a bipartisan redistricting plan, which is not relevant to anything that's going on right now, except for that it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in 2022 when Michigan's districts get totally shaken up.
Yeah, so it's been very gerrymandered, which explains why so many Republicans hold statewide office as well as represent Michigan in congressional districts in the U.S. House. But you're saying that you are now going to be redrawing those gerrymandered districts?
Yeah, there was a citizen-led ballot initiative in 2018 that passed a bipartisan redistricting commission, which is actually going to be working after the census. So that instead of having a political legislative process, we have the Citizens Commission that's going to.
Wow, I did not know. I'm so glad you mentioned. Well, what is your sense of how it will turn out? Will it turn out more equitable and fair, and districts being drawn in a more equitable and fair way, as opposed to being drawn just around the people that all agree?
Well, that's sure the hope, but this is new ground. The way that the selection process is been planned, it's very thoughtful. They've really worked hard to get representation. There's a set number of Republicans, set number of Democrats, set number of independents. It's a very detailed selection process for the commission. They're going to meet in public. It's very modeled in some ways on California's redistricting commission, very transparent, very open to the public. It's, the goal is that it's going to result in more balanced, less gerrymandered districts. that's what I sure hope, but we're going to see. We're going to see at the end of 2021, and this will be our new map in 2022.
Can you explain the kind of the difference between the 2016 presidential election and the 2020 presidential election in Michigan? Michigan, of course, surprised everybody and went for Donald Trump by a very small margin. This year, it went to Joe Biden by, I think, a larger, if not much larger margin. It swung back. Is swang a word? Swung?
It is now.
It is now. What happened?
I think 2016 took us all by surprise. Yeah, Trump won Michigan in 2016 by almost 11,000 votes. So just a razor thin margin. Like if you follow elections, which I know you do, then you know that an 11,000 vote swing is like it rained, so people didn't come out. Like it's a very small,
could be
a very small shift. Biden has won the state by almost 150,000 votes, so it's a much, much larger margin. What happened? I mean, I think we're all still struggling to understand what happened in 2016. I mean, I think we all underestimated. There's 0 through infinity reasons why any election goes the way it does. I personally know that I did not understand how much some people disliked Hillary Clinton and how unpopular she was as a candidate. And I think other people assumed she had it in the bag and they didn't need to vote.
She didn't invest a lot of resources at the time. I remember reading one article. I feel like one black guy in Detroit was like, she never came and visited us. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that he knows that and that it matters to him. And I don't know if that was a widespread shared feeling in the black community or if that's true that she didn't invest there.
It sure was. She did not really campaign heavily in Michigan, and that seems to have shown up in the results. Joe Biden didn't make that mistake. He came here, early after he became the official nominee. I think one of his first visits to the metro area, he was going to one of the suburbs north of Detroit. I can't remember which one. And there was a similar, is he going to ignore Detroit? Is he turning his back on black voters in Detroit? And then later that afternoon, my social media feeds were flooded with pictures of him in a very, not a touristy area, but a shopping district in Detroit called the Avenue of Fashion, which has got a lot of black-owned businesses, even buying souvenirs for his grandkids. So like he's good at this stuff. Like he really kind of understands that you couldn't ignore Detroit, that you needed to stop in, even if your big appearance wasn't in the city, that he needed to be a presence in the city. So that is different. He paid more attention to Detroit. He was here several times. Kamala Harris was here several times. So I don't think they made that mistake of not campaigning in Michigan and specifically in Detroit. But what is interesting is Biden didn't improve his vote tally not at all really compared to Clinton in Detroit. What did happen is that suburban communities turned out more votes for Biden. His vote tallies in Oakland County, which is Detroit has sort of 3 counties that form the metro area. The Detroit metro region has 3 counties. Detroit's in Wayne County, and there's Oakland and Macomb. Oakland has become a very blue stronghold. Macomb is much more conservative. And, Biden got a lot more votes in the county, Wayne County outside of Detroit, and in Oakland County. So, people were fired up and turning out. We had good turnout in Detroit, but in terms of vote numbers, of course, we've had significant population loss in Detroit over the last 4 years.
Well, so that's all fascinating. And by the way, shout out to Oakland University, where my wife is a graduate of. I've performed there a couple times.
Are you saying you don't want to get deep into the weeds?
No, I seriously, and just to make
you do.
No, to make sure that you realize, like, I'm actually trying to be respectful of your time and make sure I get to all the questions. If I knew I had a solid hour, I'd get even deeper into the weeds because I think this is really important and fascinating. But I know because before we started recording, you said your husband was bringing takeout home, and I want to be respectful that you eat it while it's hot, and I appreciate your time. So my other question before I get to what happened. And you said, Biden didn't ignore Detroit. Well, a couple of Republican electors tried to ignore Detroit last night in the vote. But before I get to what happened, I do want to ask you one more question, which is I'm kind of fascinated. I looked last night. I've been just kind of following. I'm always following, obviously, politics, especially Michigan politics. Really interesting to read about and learn about Gretchen Whitmer and her story. She, of course, the Democratic governor of Michigan. But what I didn't realize until a couple weeks ago was your attorney general was a woman named Dana Nessel, who's a very interesting, strong, smart woman. And I learned of her after she gave the press conference for the kidnapping plot in Gretchen Whitmer's life. And then last night, for the first time, I found out who your Secretary of State there is. Jocelyn Benson. Where did I just write it down? And I thought, oh, my goodness, there's a triumvirate of brilliant, strong women in Michigan state government politics. And I thought to myself, I don't know what's happening in Michigan last night, but I have a feeling that the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the governor of Michigan are not going to let the Detroit black voters have their vote not be counted. And so my question to you is, those three women, how are they working together? How good of a job are they doing? I'm really fascinated to see those three women in state leadership and doing such a great job. How are they doing? Where do they come from? What can you tell me about them?
I think they're all tremendous. Governor Whitmer, had a long career in the state legislature. She's smart. She's capable. She does not have any ego, as far as I can tell. She works hard to get things done. She figures out what needs fixing, and she just works at it until it gets done. I mean, we're so lucky to have her. Her leadership through the COVID pandemic, she's taken a lot of heat for it. She's taken a lot of criticism. She's been threatened. There was a plot, as you know, to kidnap her by some right-wing domestic terrorists. But yeah, she's a strong, capable leader. Our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, is one of the nation's experts on election law. I think she literally wrote the book on election law. Dana Nessel, our Attorney General, is a brilliant attorney. She was the plaintiff's attorney in the Michigan had in the same-sex marriage case that went to the Supreme Court. I think it was a wrap-up of 4 cases from different states, and Michigan's was one of them. And Dana Nessel was the plaintiff's attorney on Michigan's portion of that case. So she's someone who was involved in that important civil rights victory. It's really amazing to see our leadership. It's inspiring. These three brilliant, like you said, brilliant, strong women are running our state. You
wrote a great piece after the kidnapping attempt was discovered. And these guys were arrested, and a lot of it, the piece is, how do I frame it the way I want to? But a lot of it is talking about gender and the fact that, Gretchen Whitmer being a woman was a part of it. And I wonder how much that extends to these other 2 women we're talking about. And I wonder if you could just touch on that piece and the point you're trying to make. It's sometimes hard to convince people that sexism is at play, but you use data to make the argument in your column. And I think you did a really good job. And I was hoping to just have you touch on that.
Well, thank you. I think that the proof is sort of in the results here. I mean, there was a kidnap plot targeting Governor Whitmer. There hasn't been one targeting governors of other states that have implemented similar restrictions to COVID as she has. These are terrorists who were alleged terrorists who were incensed that she was putting the kind of, again, public health restrictions that governors all over the country have put in place, who believed she was a tyrant, who were outraged that she was exercising power and wanted to, we call it a kidnap plot, but they were going to take her to Wisconsin and put her on trial, quote unquote trial.
Crazy.
And what do you suppose they were going to do at the end of that trial? I don't think they were going to say, thank you for participating, let us take you back to Michigan. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they were, this was a, I don't know this, but it's hard to imagine this wasn't an execution plot. So, yeah, that's the flip side to this strong female leadership, is that for some people it is simply unacceptable and that they are going to do all kinds of stuff up to and including, threaten with death to try to crush it.
I just think it's I notice this even as a commentator, it's just such a double standard, because you say clearly an execution plot, but you also talk about these plots that have occurred where we hear about every once in a while these horrific nightmares where women are imprisoned against their will. And so I'm getting to just the threats of sexual assault that women have to deal with, and women in power especially. And it comes all the time. And there's a huge problem with that in the country right now. these incels and just the violence that sexism breeds is maybe a conversation for another time. But you touch on that in the column, and I think it's really important. And I always want to take an opportunity, because whenever I go on some national platform, Joe Rogan show or Real Time, these same guys always come for me, but they tell me I'm stupid, that I'm worthless, that my wife should be ashamed and stuff, but they never threaten me sexually. That I never get.
They don't threaten to rape you.
Never.
They don't threaten. No,
they say things about my penis as if they know it and think about it a lot. They do take those kinds of shots about, saying that I'm probably gay and things about my own. But it's like, I kind of shrug those things off because they're not threats to me. I don't feel threatened by them.
Let me ask you a question. Do they ever threaten your wife?
No, they usually take the tack that my wife and daughter should be ashamed of having me. But I know others get those threats. And
I had a male colleague who received repeated vile threats from someone who threatened, to rape his wife. And I thought that was so upsetting, is that even when the person, the journalist in question was a man, and the threatener objected to the man's work, it was the man's wife who he tried to visit this threat on. It was, it's such a strange. I don't understand this worldview.
It's quite, but it's quite common. I care to understand where they're coming from, to try to, because I think men especially, it's not women's job to explain to them. I think it's men, more importantly, responsibly. We can talk to other men about, hey, dude, that thinking whatever you're thinking, that's screwed up. I mean, we can have more an effect. So I do try to understand where it's coming from. But
I think that makes sense, and I appreciate you doing that work, because I think you're right. Men have to talk to other men about it. It's like how racism is for white people to fix. It's not for Black people and other people of color to fix.
Right.
The misogyny thing is for men to fix.
I hear the word exhaustion from Black people a lot, and from women a lot. Like, it's exhausting having to educate you, and it's like, you shouldn't have to. So let me ask you though about two more quick questions. One of which is, this is such an important and undercovered story that when the governor of Wisconsin, a Democrat, won, and the Republican legislature immediately voted to take his power because their guy didn't win, Scott Walker. The same thing happened apparently in Michigan. Is that right?
Yeah, there was an effort to limit the governor. Oh boy, you had to ask me for something I didn't have right in front of me. To limit some of the governor's powers, and to limit the attorney general to elect, Dana Nessel, who you mentioned earlier, some of her authority to give the legislature more ability to intervene in cases, and to restrict some of the Secretary of State's power, which, as you say, it happened in Wisconsin. It was not successful. As you say, this happened in Wisconsin, where the governor-elect was a man, but, it really seemed like, 3 women, and the legislature was trying to limit their power. It didn't seem like a coincidence. But
yeah, I think people should know that kind of cheat is in the works. When they lose the election, they then take the power from the office. It's nuts. So last night was a crazy situation that occurred in Wayne County last night, where the electors are partisan 2 versus 2, and the 2 Republicans basically tried to deny and throw out the votes of thousands and thousands of Detroiters. And a lot of people reacted, including yourself, with they're saying that when Black people vote, it's basically fraud, is what we heard. You have never seen anything like this. You have a great column, and everybody should read Nancy's column on this. Wayne County GOP canvassers tried to steal my vote. I won't be able to forget it. I mean, I sensed your fire when I read this. What happened, and what is the precedent for it?
Well, there is no precedent.
Right.
I mean, Board of Canvassers meetings are normally like real non-events, right? There's 2 in Michigan. There's 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. We have a county Board of Canvassers. We have a state Board of Canvassers, and their job is to certify the results of the election. They go through irregularities that may have occurred, and the purpose of that is to, we want to think elections are perfect. They're not. They're done by humans, and they're done by machines, all of which make errors. And so there's normally some errors in an election. They're normally not intentional. They're normally not exciting, and they're normally not widespread. And this election is no different. So, but part of the Board of Canvassers' job is to go through and say, well, we had this, mistabulation here. What happened there? And this helps protect our votes because it just sort of gives us a stronger certification. But these things are normally, kind of snooze fest, right? Like they come in, they go through records, they vote to certify.
Most people have no idea about anything about how this works. They go and they vote if they vote, and then they they have no idea what happens next. And
so then we started hearing yesterday morning that the Republican members of the Board of Canvassers might not vote to certify, which is so surprising. Tuned into the Zoom meeting. There were all kinds of problems with access to the Zoom meeting. It started about an hour and a half late because they were waiting for some affidavits from people who, we've had this rash of lawsuits here in Michigan, as in other battleground states, where there's been lawsuits filed and affidavits that claim, that there's been fraud, but then there's no substance to any of these claims. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Right.
And so the meeting started late. There was discussion, and then they took the vote. The two Republican canvassers voted not to certify. It was astounding. The legal counsel for the elections department, was explaining to them that there is no provision in state law that says if you find irregularities or if you find their complaint was that in some precincts, the number of voters in the poll book and the number of voters in the tabulator didn't match. But we're talking about like three, four names. Like, we're not talking about, there's 100 missing votes or 100 more votes. We're talking about a very small number of votes over a county where more than 800,000 people voted, and in an election that Biden won by almost 150,000.
And without knowing anything, I would assume that is what it is being called a clerical error. It is not representative. I can see maybe a small amount of votes or instances of something weird happening, triggering questions about something wider. I can understand where that might occur, but this was clearly not that. And there were worse clerical errors in other counties that these electors looked past.
Right, in other cities, right, in Wayne County. There
cities,
are,
rather, yeah.
So there was a huge outcry after they refused to certify. There were, other members, the two Democratic canvassers were clearly, visibly frustrated and upset and trying to explain that this was not acceptable. A member of the elections division staff spoke and said, this is a slap in our face. We've been working nonstop for 14 days and you're disrespecting our work, and you particularly to call it fraud. There was sort of a stunning moment where the Republican canvasser, Monica Palmer, said she would be open to certifying the vote in communities other than Detroit, which, if your listeners aren't familiar, Detroit is majority Black, about 80% Black. And that was really very revealing. Like you said, there's other cities in Wayne County where there had been similar errors, and, they're not majority Black. And there is no mechanism in state law that says in the county, you can certify all these cities, but not this city. Or, there's no mechanism to say you can certify the race for Brownstown Township City Clerk and Belleville Library Board, but you can't certify the presidential election. It's all or nothing. The vote was fine or it's not. And, after hours, and there was outraged public comment. There were, I actually had to tune off and go make dinner for my family and come back and eat dinner myself. And the comment was still going. And people were very upset about what happened. And then after a couple hours, the Zoom kind of faded out. So it's hard to tell exactly what happened. But the Board of Canvassers came back and reversed their decision, which is good. But it was I've been covering politics in Michigan for 20 years, and there's never been a time when a Board of Canvassers didn't certify the vote. It is unprecedented and not something that I could have imagined would happen prior to yesterday morning when we started hearing these rumblings. And when the first person reached out to me and said, "Are you hearing anything about this?" I said, "No, it's going to be fine." I was like, "But I better check it out." And then as I started to check it out, realized there was more.
Well, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and Debbie Dingell apparently reached out to whoever their networks, their constituents, and said, "Hey, everybody should just tune into this Zoom meeting tonight and be there," which I think was a smart move. But your column, last question here for you, Nancy, is. You said the title is Wayne County GOP canvassers tried to steal my vote. I won't be able to forget it. And I think that's really the most important part of this, because I made a big boo-boo. I made a very big kind of flip privileged mistake last night on Twitter. When this was all going down, I sometimes think it's my responsibility on Twitter, Nancy, to calm people down. And then the other part of the time, I'm raising hell. So I'm really just a hypocrite. But I saw something that made me feel more comfortable and not so worried about these two local electors, and that the head of the Republican legislature there, whose name is escaping me,
Mike Shirkey.
He basically is like, we're going to... we're not going to overturn the vote. We're not going to, it's all is fine. So I tweeted that news and I wrote, calm down. And I'm proud to say I have a diverse following on Twitter, but a bunch of black people, according to their avatars, didn't much care for my calm down. They found it flip and they found it privileged. And I think that's exactly what you're saying in your column when you say, I won't be able to forget it. Because when I said calm down, it's like, don't worry. They're going to count the votes. This is not going to be a big deal. And then reading your column, it's like, you know what? And hearing from those people, it's like, no, it's a huge deal that they attempted to do this. And why won't you forget it? And why is it such a big deal? And why is it flipped for people like me to be like, relax, everything's going to be fine?
So I'm a Detroit voter. And so, when they were doing this, they're disenfranchising me. Like last night I was working the story, covering the story, and it kind of took a little while for that to sink in. But when I woke up this morning, it was like, holy crap. They tried to steal my vote. And, I'm collateral damage, right? Like the intent here, it's not just to disenfranchise Democrats, because if they wanted to disenfranchise Democrats, the canvasser wouldn't have said we can certify other cities, but just not Detroit. This was about disenfranchising black voters. This was about perpetuating the idea that there's just something slightly questionable about black voters, about black cities, when black people are in charge. And this is, as a friend of mine said for another column I wrote about this is the same idea that leads police officers to treat black people with suspicion no matter what they're doing. This is why black people get shot, because there is this belief that way too many white people have that blackness equals guilt. And this is something white people have to get over. I would imagine that most of the people listening to your show do not have this belief. And I personally get very frustrated when, I don't know what to do about these other white people. I don't know them. I don't know, they don't come up and talk to me about about this, but this is a thing that cannot go on. And I don't know how we get past it, but this can't be part of America. This is an outrage. It is privileged to assume that the vote would be counted. This is an incredibly blatant attempt to just disenfranchise 800,000 people, and specifically 250,000 mostly black voters in the city of Detroit. Elections officials tell us that if this had been successful, if the board hadn't reversed itself, this would have gone to the state board of canvassers, which has the same 2-2 Democratic Republican split. And then if they hadn't certified it, it would have gone to the Supreme Court, which would have ordered them to certify. Because, again, you can't simply invalidate an election for 800,000 people or 250,000 people or 2,000 people.
Right, yeah.
But I'm sorry, I'm less than comforted by the idea that if the County Board of Canvassers didn't do their job, and then if the State Board of Canvassers didn't do their job, that the state Supreme Court would make them do their job. Like, that's a few too many fail-safes for me here.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like, is this how we want? Is this what democracy is supposed to look like? Just because it works, just because it comes out right in the end. I mean, we're taking damage here. We're like a boat that's taking on water, and we've got to be really careful about how much more damage we could incur and still have a functional society.
Well, people like you writing and covering this stuff keeps the boat afloat, and I'm psyched that you were able to join me. Follow her right now on Twitter at Nancy Kaffer. Read her at Detroit Free Press. Support that newspaper, freep.com/Kaffer to read her column. And so great to catch up with you and talk to you. It's been far too long, and I hope to do it again very soon. Thanks a lot, Nancy.
Truly a pleasure, Pete.
Wasn't she great? Nancy Kaffer. Follow her on Twitter. She has not been on the show in a long, long time. Certainly hasn't been on the podcast. She was last joined me years ago at Sirius XM, and it's been far too long. Been trying to get her on, and psyched to have had her join me on the show today. So go to Twitter if you're on Twitter and say, thank you for joining Pete. Love that conversation. Learned a lot. Read her column as well at the Detroit Free Press. She's on Twitter at Nancy Kaffer, Kaffer. All right. Well, I always love my conversations with my next guest. She's one of my closest friends, somebody I feel like I can tell anything to, and sometimes I do and forget that I'd been recording, and that's how our conversations go sometimes. He is one of the smartest, most experienced guys I've ever met in my life on such a wide range of issues. He's so curious, he's so passionate, and he's so educated on such a wide range of issues. I always love to get his take on just about everything, from parenting to politics. Obviously, he's a specialist when it comes to constitutional law because he teaches that at Georgia State University. And he is an author. He's written a couple of books, Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith most recently. And I always love talking to him. I can't really tell you what we talked about because we talked about so many things in this conversation. It's just a little over an hour, but at the end of it, it gets real crazy because I start saying that I have violent fantasies about causing violence to people who would take away the vote. Take away our vote. And as I mentioned, uncomfortable with that earlier. And we get to that, and he weighs in on that at the end of the conversation. I hope you'll listen to all of it. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. You've got my email, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And if you haven't started a paid subscription yet, please do. Please do. Just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes and sign up right now and join me tonight on the Zoom Hangout tonight at 8 Eastern. If you're a subscriber, I hope to see a bunch of you there. As always, a great chat. And here now, my conversation with Eric Segall. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the Legal Eagle, Eric Segall, who apparently is a little moody tonight. What's going on, pal? What's going on? Why did you tell me you're moody?
Well, I'm moody for two reasons. One is I want January 20th to be today.
Are you also ornery?
No.
Just
I'm
moody.
never ornery. I'm never ornery.
What's the difference?
But I can be. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between moody and ornery.
I have always thought them to be similar, and now I'm trying to differentiate.
Well, if we took the time to delineate that difference,
moods are emotions. There's different emotions that you could be. Ornery is only one of those emotions. How about that?
Ornery is more obnoxious. I don't think I'm going to be obnoxious for the next 30 minutes, but I might be moody. There's a chance
because you can't, because you're basically on hanging by a thread. Just you still think that Donald Trump might not leave and January 20th can't come soon enough. That's everything. That's what you're worried about.
Well, it's not that. Well, I now if I had to bet, I would bet. I'm a betting man. That's how you view life. You make your bets and you play the odds. I think he will leave. I think he's trying to burn everything down before that. And that's exactly, did I mention exactly? It's exactly what all of us knew he was going to do, because that's the kind of person he's always been since 1989 at least. And everyone knows that, who's smart. He is going to intentionally make things harder for our country out of spite and to help his post-presidency life. And he's going to do it in a way that, well, Reagan couldn't have done it because he was suffering from mental disease, but that neither Bush did, that Clinton didn't do, that Obama didn't do. He is literally going to make it much harder for this country to be successful. He's already done that with the pandemic, obviously, but he's going to do it across the board because that's who he is.
How do you?
It's not surprising.
When you say that's who he is, and that's not surprising, I know you always go back to his mentor, Roy Cohn. Why was Roy Cohn a bad man, and why was Donald Trump his protege an even worse man?
So most of the people listening to this will remember something called McCarthyism. They weren't alive for that, but in the 1950s, there was a horrible witch hunt of people in Hollywood and homosexuals and others, gays and lesbians. I mean, they're called homosexuals at the time. That's why I use that phrase. And people lost their jobs. Horrible stuff. And Joe McCarthy was a senator who made his name at first nationally by going after these alleged communists, not only in government, which was how he started, but then in Hollywood and in New York. There was some anti-Semitic parts to this. There was definitely anti-gay parts to this. McCarthy was the front man. He was the senator in front of the microphone, who eventually another senator or somebody said to him, "Have you no dignity, sir?" Yeah. And that pretty much ended his career.
Have you no shame?
Roy Cohn, have you no shame? I'm sorry. Thank you, Pete. I told you I was going to, okay. Have you no shame? Roy Cohn was his right-hand man. And many people think Roy Cohn was as responsible for this whole horrific debacle in American culture and society for those many, many years. Then Roy Cohn became a very prominent lawyer in New York and did all kinds of nasty and terrible things. He was as homophobic as you get. And then, of course, it turns out he was gay. So he was, by Donald Trump's own admission, at some point along the line, Donald Trump's mentor. He taught Donald Trump everything he knew. He taught him see if this sounds familiar. This was Roy Cohn's theory of how you do things. You never admit you're wrong ever, no matter what. You never concede defeat ever, no matter what. Even if you've lost, you never conceded it. And you never, ever, for God's sake, apologize. Ever. But then Roy Cohn got AIDS. So in the 80s, when Roy Cohn got AIDS, Donald Trump abandoned him. Think about that for a minute. And at some point, in some point in that stretch of time, according to Vanity Fair and according to a couple of the sources that I trust and respect, when Donald Trump basically fired Roy Cohn as his lawyer, Roy Cohn had to hand off Donald Trump's file, which I'm sure was, a big, complicated file, to somebody else to be his lawyer. And he handed it to Roger Stone. Yes, the Roger Stone. And the story goes that when he handed the file to Roger Stone, he said, "This man, or this file, pisses ice." Now, for Roy Cohn to think that somebody else pisses ice, Pete, I've said this before to you, and my study of American history tells me, I should say post-World War II American history. I'm just talking about post-World War II American history. There is no public figure worse than Roy Cohn until Trump. Nixon was everybody's best friend compared to Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was an evil, terrible man. There are documentaries you can watch, and Trump is worse than him. And everybody knew it.
In 1986, he was disbarred by the appellate division of the New York State Supreme Court for unethical conduct after attempting to defraud a dying client by forcing the client to sign a will amendment, leaving him his fortune. He then himself, Roy Cohn, died 5 weeks later from AIDS-related complications.
Well, you know the story. I'm sorry.
There's one more thing I was reading, and I'm looking him up as you're talking here about him, and it's interesting that Roy Cohn introduced Donald Trump to Rupert Murdoch in the 70s.
Yep. So let's back up just 1 minute, because I mentioned that I might be a little bit moody this evening.
Moody.
I am not. I have a tendency to maybe be excessive at times. I am not I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that Roy Cohn was just an evil man, Pete, and Trump is worse. And we knew that. We knew it as early as, we knew it early, but I'm from New York and I'm much older than you. So I was aware of Donald Trump.
Well, I'm from New York too. And I knew it. Young. But I knew it because around 9/11, and then I was on The Apprentice in 2004. And, when I had the opportunity to meet him, I was like, I'm good. I'll pass. Does he want to meet us? No. I thought he was a sexual predator, if anything.
Well, I'm sure he is.
He was on Howard Stern a lot. I'd hear him there. Anyway, go ahead. Right. We knew who he was. Right. Go ahead.
We knew exactly who. Well, so in 1989 or before that, there's this terrible rape of a woman in Central Park. And of course, they wanted in New York, and they wanted someone to blame. So eventually, I think it's 5, Central Park 5. Yeah, kids were arrested and everything. Trump used that as a vehicle to express his racist views. But I'm not even going to blame him for that for now. Let's leave that aside. But then, after horrible procedural hearings and all this other stuff that's for these 5 kids, DNA evidence conclusively showed they weren't guilty. After that, he still said they were guilty.
Yeah. Because it can't be wrong. He can't retract a statement. He can't apologize.
He can't admit defeat. He can't ever do that.
Right.
So in his mind, I mentioned this to you a couple of times on the air before, and then we've never talked about it because I can't talk about it on the air. But I want to be careful how I say this, Pete. My mother was a therapist. I don't claim to have any kind of psychological knowledge, background, or degree of any kind. But I have known intimately a sociopath who has risen in American society very high. And we were roommates. I knew him for 3 years, and we were very close. And he deceived me really badly and betrayed me really badly. And I have no doubt he's a sociopath in retrospect. And then his behavior since then suggests he's a sociopath. My understanding is Trump cannot accept that he lost. In other words, he was wronged. He didn't lose. He was wronged. And the only response to that is to wrong the people who wronged you. And that's what he's doing now. And we'll get to it in a little bit.
He hates Americans. The majority hates them, resents them.
Yes.
They've wronged him. He has lost on the biggest stage in the world, and he can't lose even in private in a poker game. He cannot ever lose, and he's in denial about it, obviously.
Right. That's what a sociopath is and doesn't. And I have to also say that I think okay, now I'm going to say something I cannot support. This is a theory. I don't have everything I've said so far. I'm very confident about. This I'm not, but I think it's probably true. My guess is Republicans tried, and Trump specifically, with using Republicans, tried really hard to cheat in this election, but they didn't want to cheat too much because they knew that there was going to be a lot of scrutiny. So they didn't cheat quite enough to win, which is why he's saying the other side is cheating, because he always projects.
Yeah.
He's been projecting since he's been in the public eye. Can you hear that crazy noise in the background? I hope not. But that's not, but you know what? That's not the point of all this. After we talk, we'll get back to it, but really smart, elite lawyers always knew this about Trump. Nothing we're talking about was not known in 19.
Well, yeah, because they'd all been in litigation. He'd been in litigation with so many lawyers who were astonished by his behavior and his inability to behave in a normal way, and his mission to destroy everybody and everything that in any way had wronged him. And there are a lot of terrible people in litigation that do terrible things, but this guy's his record.
And yet the executive, I forget his exact title, Pete. So I'm executive director or executive vice president. I forget which of those two of the Federalist Society. Mm-hmm. And lawyers at Heritage, including, and I say this with a lot of sadness. So I clerked for a federal judge from 1983 to 1985, a federal trial judge. And someone applied to replace me, and I helped my judge. I interviewed the people who were going to replace me for my judge. And I met somebody who did, in fact, then get the job based on my recommendation. And then I clerked at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And this person who I hired for that, my judge hired, I recommended, was also hired by my next judge based on my recommendation. And we became very close friends. And even though he was very conservative, and he was, but we were, we would go out and have drinks, and we would argue and be the best. We were just very close friends. Mm-hmm. He ended up working at the Department of Justice in 2000 for George Bush. In the computer crime department, which was a big deal once 9/11 happened, obviously. And then he went to Heritage, which is, a think tank in D.C. And he's the one, his name is John Malcolm, who Adam Liptak of the New York Times originally said came up with the list of judges that Donald Trump identified in 2000 when he was running for president as potential Supreme Court nominees. And when that happened, I remember calling John and saying, wow, that's great publicity for you. Are you sure you want to support this guy? I mean, and we kind of argued about it a little bit, but it turns out it wasn't him. It turns out he was a front man. for Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society and Don McGahn. Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society and Don McGahn prepared that list. And we all know, everyone in the world knows, that Donald Trump did not wake up one morning in 2015 or 16 and say, I have a really good idea. I'm going to run for president saying I'm only going to appoint originalist judges like Antonin Scalia. That's what I'm going to. Of course, he did not do that. He wouldn't know he wouldn't know what that word meant, obviously. So these two lawyers, Leonard Leo, Don McGahn, and I think John Malcolm, to my great regret, basically were the elite lawyers, along with some others, who came up with that strategy. It's the first time I think it's the first time in American history any president ever went public with a list of Supreme Court nominees before they were actually nominated. And I want to say this, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll do it in reverse order, and people have to remember, this has been forgotten. This is a fact I'm going to give you that people have forgotten. Trump won 3 Midwestern swing states by a total of 80,000 votes.
Yeah. In 2016.
Yeah. He doesn't win those states without that list of judges, Pete. He just doesn't. He doesn't get where he is without these enablers. And they fucking knew who he was. And they each had different motivations, by the way, I think. What people have to understand about Leonard Leo is he is part of a very religious organization that really does believe that there's going to come a day when the good people go to heaven and the bad people go to hell.
He is? I didn't know he was one of them.
Yes, he is.
Christian.
Yes, he is. It's called. It's got a Latin name. I'm blanking. I'm having a senior moment on the name of it. But yes, he is. And
I'll look it up.
And by the way, one of the reasons we know that Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society was so important to Trump during the campaign is that immediately afterwards, he took a, quote, leave of absence from the Federalist Society, quote, unquote, to go to the White House and basically get Trump as judges, which is what he did for like 2 years. So I am so frustrated that law professors and lawyers and judges even, it's trickier with judges, but they have life tenure. Forget judges. I am so annoyed with elite lawyers in the Federalist Society and law professors who won't say that the head of our organization made a big mistake and we're really sorry, America. Like, I think.
Well, why would they? What would they apologize for? They got the judges they want. Is it the Knights of Malta that he's a member of?
No.
That's what the Daily Beast article says. Leonard Leo is a member of the secretive, extremely conservative Knights of Malta, a Catholic order found in the 12th century that functions as a quasi-independent.
Okay, it's got another name. That is the one, but it's called something else. It's also called by Latin.
Well,
but yes, that is the one. Yes.
So my question is, what should they be?
Well, let me ask you this. I know 70 million Americans voted for him. I get that. We can talk about that too.
This is the second time for his reelection.
Right,
Trump.
Yes. Yeah. But let me ask you this. Do you think reasonable people can disagree as to whether or not Donald Trump should be president of the United States?
Sure.
I don't. Sorry. I don't.
In terms of, what do you mean? Reasonable people?
No, what I mean is, if someone came up to you and said, I've studied history a lot. I think Roy Cohn should have been president. What would you say to that person?
Oh, in terms of just hypothetically, should this person, based on who they are, be qualified for this job?
Not qualified. No, I'm not talking about qualified. What we know now is what we knew then. Nothing has changed.
Right.
Trump hasn't changed at all.
Right.
I'm asking you again. If you met someone in 2016 and they said to you, the only justification I've ever heard for Trump that I might have sympathy for is someone, and this does explain a lot of why he's president. Eric, listen. I've had this conversation with so many people. Mm-hmm. Eric, he's an awful, terrible scumbag. Of course he is. Meanwhile, 1 million babies are killed in America every year.
Yeah. What is that noise? That is.
I'm sorry. Let me move. Yeah,
what is it?
It's Lynn's broken computer.
It's broken?
What the hell? It makes strange noises. So
move away from it, please.
I am. That's what
it sounds like. It sounds like a video game.
Hey, I'm Moody. Be careful with me here. I'm Moody.
So you're saying it is a lawful justification to support him because you think that abortion is murder and he's saving millions of lives?
I'm not saying anything's lawful or unlawful.
Okay. I just want to use the word lawful, really.
If anyone says to you, I think Trump should be president because he's going to do the best for our domestic policy economically, or he's going to be a great foreign policy person, or he's really smart, or he's really educated, or whatever, you're going to laugh in their face. I hope, because you should, because that's stupid. All that's stupid. It's ignorant. It's dumb. It makes no sense. What does make sense, though? It is. See, Pete, this is the thing. McCain, Obama, take your pick. I mean, I prefer Obama, but that was a reasonable choice. Romney, Obama, take your pick. Gore, Bush. Yes, I agree the Iraq thing might not have happened under Gore's watch, but there's a very strong argument that Gore and Clinton were as more warmongering than many Republicans. Those are all reasonable disagreements. We can't reasonably disagree about Trump's character. We can't.
Right, I agree.
If we do, I got to end the conversation.
No, I obviously I don't.
Not you
disagree.
and me. I mean, anybody.
There is
anybody.
no character by the
Right.
but you know, it's the phrase. I always love that you use the phrase reasonable people can disagree or agree, but now I'm wary of the phrase reasonable people.
Well, that's fair. That's a different conversation. That's fair. No, that's fair. That's a very fair point.
Is it reasonable to argue that JFK Jr. is going to come back? Is that reasonable?
No.
I mean, there's so much, you know, I will talk. I have this conversation with my buddy Joe today, Joe Liotta, who and I went for a walk with today. And Joe and I were talking about.
Did you hold hands?
No, we elbow bumped a lot, though, quite a bit. And you know, I was talking about, I just don't know where people are anymore in terms of, you know, what are their critical thinking and skills to reason? Because if you believe in all these conspiracy theories, like, who are we talking about? But that's fair. And it's a good point, but it's parallel to this conversation. The point I want to make in this conversation, there are apparently 70 million Americans who either, I don't want to ascribe motivations. And let's go back to what I was trying to say. Okay.
If someone comes up to me and says, I believe in my heart that 1 million babies are being killed every year, and I think this person may help us stop that. And that's the most important thing to me. And I understand because corporations run America and we're going to do our foreign policy and whatever. But I got to stop those 1 million babies from being killed. Now, that's an argument that I think reasonable people can disagree about. Now, when I say back to those people, yes. And what you need to understand is no matter who's president, no matter who's on the Supreme Court, we could have 8, 9 Amy Coney, Republican, partisan, crazy theological person who should never ever be near a courthouse person on the Supreme Court and make abortion illegal in all 50 states with the death penalty as the punishment. We're still going to have 1 million abortions a year. You're not going to decrease abortions that way. So that's the flaw in that argument. You can't stop abortions. No society has ever stopped. You can't stop abortions. You can
limit them. You can decrease them.
Not by much. I don't think so. I don't think the data supports that. I do not think the data supports that. But in any event, that's an argument we can talk about. But elite lawyers like Leonard Leo and Don McGahn, who ended up being White House counsel and was technically also part of the picking judges team, and my friend John Malcolm, who I know very well and is very smart, they should have known better. Whether 70 million Americans should know better, the point you were making, where we are, that's a fair point. I don't know anymore. But I know John Malcolm and I know these two other men. I mean, I don't know them personally. I know who they are. These are smart. These are people smarter than I am. I mean, these are smart people. But you know, they should have known.
Here's the question I really want to get you to answer, because you're kind of dancing around this point, which is that we know that they supported him. I mean, Steve Bannon once was quoted as saying something like, you know, Trump's an idiot. He's a blunt instrument to get us what we want.
Right.
And that's the exact same thing I would imagine Don McGahn and Leonard Leo and John Malcolm all believe, that he is going to get us the judges that we want in every court in the land. That's what he did. They accomplished that. So your point is what? They accomplished that. That's what they wanted. But also Let
me ask you a question. Yes, that's what they would say, I think. Although I don't know about John. I think the other two would say other things about Trump that you and I would disagree with, probably. But let me ask you this. At what cost? First of all, I mean, really, at what cost? I mean, it strikes me that had Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz won the nomination in 2016, we would have the same judges. Probably, right? You agree with that, right? I mean, Cruz
it's a good point. Going with any of these Lindsey Graham, people who ran for president, you would have had similar appointments. Sure. Yeah, I give you that.
And you know how much
and they wouldn't have needed the Federalist Society because they would have already had relationships with them because they're already part of that universe. Right. It's part of their...
And you know how much I hate Ted Cruz. But in terms of polarization, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of the pandemic, I don't think, I can't prove this, Pete. This is speculation, but I don't think Cruz or Rubio or Graham or Jeb Bush or any of them would have handled the pandemic this way. Do you?
Not even remotely.
Not even remotely.
No, I think every one of them. Listen, here's something that who was I talking to yesterday? Oh, Jared Yates Sexton about this. Yeah. Here's something that nobody's really talked about. And it's a great point to bring up while you're talking. Would they have handled it any differently? Here's the I bet you anything, Eric. All those guys, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and definitely Lindsey Graham, they would have worn a mask from the start.
Yes.
They would have done that. They never would have thought of it as a masculinity thing or a political thing. They would not have considered, or a freedom thing.
Well, let's be more specific, Pete. Let's get to the nub of it. I've been criticized for what I'm about to say, and you may criticize me for this, but I really believe it. I mean, I believe it's my heart, so you can just say my heart's wrong.
That Sarah Palin isn't the mother of that child? Please don't do it. Please.
No. Can't believe you brought that up. I'm going to bring up
that you don't have a guest house. What are you about to say?
I'm going to bring up your guest house. You, by the way, have a guest house.
What are you about to say that is so controversial?
This is going to be. You're not going to like it, but I think it's true. The first part you're going to like. You're going to hate the second part. I think if you said to Lindsey Graham tomorrow, or Ted Cruz, or Marco Rubio, or Jeb Bush, or anyone else in that race, you can be president, but you have to kill 1 million Americans. To do it, you won't get in trouble, but you have to kill 1 million Americans. None of them would do it. I don't think Ted Cruz would kill 1 million. I think Donald Trump would in 1 second. I think if he can make a compact,
Trump would have responded with only 1 million. Done.
Right. Well, I mean, I know this sounds crazy.
Can I also choose their ethnicity and gender? Is there any way I could?
Do you know how many careers Roy Cohn ruined? I mean, lives. I mean, people commit suicide. I mean, I'm not. I don't.
But is there a great documentary or book on him?
Yes. There's several. Yes. But there's a new one from 2 years ago. It's really good. Okay. Yes. It'll make you vomit. No. So then I go on to say, why do American? This is my new thing. I haven't written it up because I didn't want to be screamed at. But why is it that this is part of American exceptionalism? Why do we think we're immune from figures like Stalin, Putin, Hitler, Mussolini, and the Hungarian, dictator and the Brazil dictator? Why do we think we're immune to that?
I haven't thought that much about it, but I think it's a really important question, and I want to give a knee-jerk answer.
Well, let me just say what I mean by that. I don't mean – I think it's fair. I think it would have been fair for someone to say, Eric, you're underestimating our institutions. And I would say, that's fine. I agree with that. I'm not going to argue with that. That may be right. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, could our society produce someone that evil? And the answer is obviously yes. We have white supremacists, Timothy McVeigh. I mean, we have evil people in this country, right? I mean, really evil.
If you read Jason Stanley, and I think those writers, I think the first was Hannah Arendt. Is that her name? How it's pronounced? But
I'm not sure.
But Jason Stanley talks about this in his new book. I'm trying to look up the name of it, but that like Hitler and the Nazis came over to the American South to learn white supremacy. Right. But basically, like, you guys, maybe you might be taking a little too far with some of it. Obviously, Hitler was committed genocide. But
I think Trump would. He just can't. It's not an option for him. But I think he would. I'm sorry. I
mean, I think it's different. I think it's less overt and less implicit in that he would put people in death camps. I think what he's been able to get away with is looking the other way on a disease that more disproportionately kills lower income folks and minorities, as well as older people with comorbidities.
You made that way too complicated.
Okay. How fascism works by Jason Stanley.
He doesn't care if people die. I think Ted Cruz does. Honestly, I do. I think Ted Cruz is a human being in that sense. I don't think Donald Trump is. I think I don't think Ted Cruz is a sociopath. I think Donald Trump is a sociopath.
And a sociopath is someone who doesn't care about anybody else.
They can't see past their nose.
They can't see, but they have no empathy for anybody, and they can't learn it. It's just part of their.
Yes. You know what he did to Marla Maples?
Marla Maples was second wife. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what he did to her?
I mean, probably a lot of terrible things. I don't know specifically what you're about to say.
Yeah. Well, leaving aside, of course, that there were he allegedly raped his first wife, but she retracted that. But who knows what the truth is.
And by the way, what that rape was over, apparently he was mad at her because Ivana, his first wife, suggested the surgeon that was going to give him the hair transplant. It went bad, and so he got home and forced himself on her. I think that's the story.
Well, we don't know if that's. Let's be fair. We don't know. She
said it in a deposition.
I know, but then she retracted it. But leaving it aside, I'm trying.
That's probably because he was like, if you don't retract that, you're not going to get the money. I mean, listen, you have a choice.
I'm trying to be reasonable here.
Fix the record.
I'm trying to be lawyerly here. I
don't have to be, and that's why it's great that you're here. Go ahead.
But what he did do to Marla Maples is he waited the day before the final day to divorce. There was a day where if he divorced her after that, she would get a ton of money, and he divorced her like the day before or something.
The day before.
Something like that. It doesn't matter. He is obviously an intentionally cruel. First of all, how did we get a president who called, and this is all, now these are all facts. Now I'm going to just throw facts at you. He called Rosie O'Donnell a fat cow, right? Or fat pig or whatever that thing was. He called her that. He talked about, that Fox News woman's period during the debate, Megyn Kelly, right?
He made up blood coming out of somewhere.
He made up all kinds of nicknames, small Marco and boring Jet. I mean, think about how he came to power.
Energy Jeb, which is the very best.
Just cruelty. So the question you're asking is this question of American exceptionalism would somehow make us think that we would never allow a madman like Stalin or Hitler or Mao or Saddam although we've had a couple
us.
of presidents like this. Although there was no one more racist than Wilson, right? I mean,
Donald Trump is the most racist president.
Right, maybe. Yeah. I mean, we've had some pretty awful damn presidents.
Yeah, but a madman. You're saying somehow we would not go there, and you're saying the best arguments are about our institutions would not allow for it. And then you're also discussing how did America, the United States of America, vote for a man who has such a low life. And
showed it. And showed it on national television.
And the answer is obvious, is it not?
I think we have different answers.
My answer is there's about 70 million terrible people that listen, terrible by what I thought was a baseline morality of both secular and religious people, which is generally don't be an asshole.
Yeah, I'm starting.
Don't rip people off. Don't present yourself as something that you're not. Just basic shit we all agree to teach our kids.
Yeah, that's all before reality TV. I don't know. Maybe
you're saying reality TV is what caused the devolution of American society, culture, character.
No. I'm saying that the exposure he got for a decade on The Apprentice.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Gave him an illusion of something. But here's the thing. So that's okay.
He's all an illusion. He's always been an illusion, down to the coloring of his skin. And
he faked his way into Penn. He didn't really get in. He
faked his name, himself as his own publicist. This is John Barron. This is Donald Trump. It's John Barron. So, sir, I know it's you. It's John.
Okay, but Pete, so here's what I want to say. And this may get me in trouble. May get you in trouble because it's on your show, on your podcast. But here's what I want to say. So when you say 70 million, here's what I'm willing to say. So unlike you, I spent a lot of time in Alabama. A lot of time. My first wife, her family lived in Alabama the entire time we were married. And I spent a lot of time in Alabama. Auburn, Alabama to be specific, but also Opelika, Alabama, which is close to Auburn, but not the same, because Auburn's a college town, whereas Opelika is just a small neighboring town. And I would eat and talk to and hobnob with people, maybe with high school educations, maybe not. And and who live a very different life than pampered, spoiled Eric Segall from Long Island, New York. And I like doing that, by the way. I've always liked doing this. One of the reasons I came south to begin with, I kind of wanted to see a different way of life and different experience, something different than, because I didn't like my Long Island upbringing at all. I hated it. So I have, unlike most of my colleagues who are law professors, I have spent much time in places in this country that went heavily for Trump, both elections. And what I want to say is, it's one thing to fool those people. It's another thing to be enabled by Leonard Leo. Those are different things. They're not the same. But Pete, people with a high school education or less, who really have to work 16-hour days to put food on the table, or less, there are all kinds of, we can talk about all the economic issues in America that you know more about than I do, and the healthcare issues and all of that. It's one thing for this reality TV star, billionaire, real estate mogul who comes from a gold-plated bathroom and walks down a gold elevator when he, and then is very clever in his nicknames and all that stuff. We can talk about all the problems with how he fooled all those people. That does not in any way tell us why Leonard Leo supported him. And what I'm telling you is that, and I feel strongly about this, is the reason Leonard Leo and Don McGahn and Bill Barr and all these people were willing to support Donald Trump. Those reasons are nefarious. They are racist, sexist, gendered, awful, religious reasons. And that is the part of this that makes me just want to cry. It has been from the beginning. I lost a friend over this, a close friend, because I've never done it before, ever. I have never, ever put politics between a friend and me, ever. But their certitude that abortion is wrong, or at least that they don't want abortion to be legal, I'm not sure it's the same thing. Their certitude that gender equality is not important. Pete, we live in a country that has, however many millions and millions of Catholics, and women still can't be priests. Their certitude that they know what's best.
Yeah.
If it would be like if Donald Trump came to me and said, you know what, Eric, I think the Supreme Court's not a court. And Supreme Court has been doing enormous damage for the last 150 years. And you're right about everything you said about the Supreme Court. You support my presidency. And I, as president, I'm going to take this on. And I'm going to use my power of the podium and my power in Congress to get term limits done, to strip the court of jurisdiction. You've convinced me that this country is better off without the Supreme Court. Now you support me. I wouldn't have fucking supported him, Pete. As strongly as I feel that I'm right on all of those issues, I would never have supported this monster. And they did. And you know what's worse? They won't admit they were wrong. So Randy, I'm going to say it, Randy fucking Barnett, who on Twitter has never once, con law professor at Georgetown, once criticized Donald Trump. Not once on Twitter in 4 years. Even law professors in the Federalist Society who never voted for him and who came out against him and who said, we're never Trumpers. This whole never Trumpers legal, thing. It predated the Lincoln Project, whatever that thing is, the Lincoln thing. They today won't say the Federalist Society had anything to do with it. They deny it to this day. They say, that was just Leonard Leo in his personal capacity. That's a bunch of crap. And the first part of healing, I assume, of most things, is to recognize the problem. And those 70 million, I can come up with excuses for them, Pete. I know you don't want to, but I can't.
No, I can't. Listen, I'm changing too. I don't know if you're changing, but I'm not saying that you should. I think that you understand exactly why you think the way you think about these issues, and you have for a long time. What I'm saying when I'm saying I'm changing is I'm doing my best to try to listen. Right. Is horrible. I need to do better, and with people I disagree with, but I get why they voted for him. I'm not one of those people. I don't understand how you can look at this man and say, I guess I have been guilty of saying that kind of thing. I get it. I think I do get it to some extent with a lot of them, and I want to try to understand it. But I generally think that those with a certain level of education is the delineation point more than gender and socioeconomics.
I have a lot of smart friends, Peter, and it's not a question of education to me. It's, are you smart? Do you read?
Well, listen, I'm not talking about me. I don't have an education.
Yeah, but you're really smart.
Well, so I read a lot. I'm saying you wouldn't categorize people like me. We're outliers in that we didn't get a formal education, but we were curious and kind of got self-educated. What's the word for that? The word for it?
I don't know. I'm not educated enough to know. Oh.
Anyway,
I'm not smart enough to know.
You've made a great point about the kind of the craven sociopathic qualities that it would take to say, I get everything I want, but I have to endorse this monster. And he is a monster.
Yes. He's killing. Yes. I mean, he doesn't care who lives and dies.
But he doesn't care about, he does not now and never has cared about anybody or anything.
Right.
And I don't know
that's not true for Ted Cruz. It's not true for Ted Cruz. I think he has empathy. I don't like Ted Cruz at all. I don't think it's true for Marco Rubio. I don't think it's true. I mean, Lindsey Graham, I don't know what the hell he's doing. But even Lindsey Graham, I think, has some decency in him. Have you ever seen Trump be decent?
Never. No. Not without finding out later that what I mistakenly thought was decency. He was getting something on the back end.
Yeah, I mean,
autodidact.
Yes. I just,
that's what I am. I'm an autodidact.
So how we got on this subject, which wasn't what we were going to talk about. Sorry for so what's going to happen between now and January 20th? I'm picking. Leonard Leo knew what happened. Maybe Leonard Leo is for destroying America. I don't know, but Leonard Leo and Don McGahn knew that if Donald Trump ever lost re-election, he would burn down America, try to burn down America before he left. This is not a surprise to anybody. This is what we all knew.
Yeah.
And this is assuming he leaves, which I'm now assuming for sake of argument. Who knows?
He's just but here's what he's going to do, Eric. He's going to get on a plane next week or sometime in December.
Yeah.
He's going to fly to Florida under the guise, that he's just going to Mar-a-Lago for Christmas. He's just not going to come back.
Okay, but let's talk about this for a second. You know what else? So I had on my podcast today a guy named a professor named Josh Douglas, who's a great election law scholar and wrote a great book. And you had him on your old radio show once. And we were both ruminating about how there's a lot of problems in our electoral system, obviously, that long predate Donald Trump. The Electoral College, we have a lot of problems in America Donald Trump has nothing to do with. But he has made 70 million Americans really doubt the veracity of some of the best people in America, which are the election workers in this country, who work day and night and give their heart and soul, Republicans and Democrats, to do it right and do it fairly. Mm-hmm. And then they make mistakes sometimes. And there's some bad apples. There always are, right? We're humans. You can't construct a human project this big without some bad apples and some mistakes. But generally speaking, we should trust these people. And he is tearing that down. Pete, it is a dark Black Mirror or Twilight Zone episode that Trump is going after my governor, Kemp. Governor Kemp was one of Trump's biggest.
Is he now going after the governor? I know he went after the Secretary of State.
Yes. Oh, yes.
What's going on with Brian Kemp kissed the ring.
Yes. Yesterday or today, Trump tweeted about him. And I think he sent Lindsey Graham to do mischief in Georgia. That seems to be pretty clear.
Yeah.
But anyway, in Georgia, despite the fact that our state somehow went for Biden, it's still the fact that the governor is a very conservative Republican, the Secretary of State is Republican, and the legislature is very conservative Republican. He is calling into it. He is saying somehow that the Georgia election was tilted towards Biden. Think about that for a minute.
No, I actually have thought about that a lot, and I talked about it last night. I have one pretty good theory or thought every quarter. You know that.
I would say once every hour.
Now, stop it. This quarter's thought was that Republican secretaries of state's primary responsibility is conduct free and fair, unencumbered elections. That's what their job is. All secretaries of states, not and that they pride themselves on that. It's very important that they get it right. They don't want any question about it because that's their reputation. That's how they move up. They would never cheat for either side because it's not the kind of thing that you can do and get away with. It would tarnish you. However, the only one that may have really done that, the only Secretary of State in recent times who was questionable on how he conducted the election was Brian Kemp. He was the Secretary of State of Georgia before he became the governor, and now Donald Trump is questioning Brian Kemp's the way he's run this election after he cheated on the last one. And this is classic Donald Trump. Somebody cheats for him, bends the rules for him, and they won't go far enough, or even if they have, he then still fucks him over a la Jeff Sessions and so many other names, bodies littered around him.
Right, but that's
they lie, they cheat, and they steal for him, and then he still fucks them in the end. It's unbelievable that you would lie, cheat, and steal for somebody who's guaranteed to screw you in the end, no matter what.
But how are we living in a country where the president
when is he going to screw Bill Barr? That's going to be, it's coming. After Bill Barr lied, cheat, and steal for him.
So there's one difference between Bill Barr and, for example, Jeff Sessions or all the other bodies. Bill Barr is much smarter than Jeff Sessions, people.
Okay, so I agree. He's covered his tracks. He's what?
Maybe, I don't know. Who knows? Of course, Trump screws everybody. There's never a time when.
Yeah, you think Bill Barr's over there going, listen? I know, Mr. President, that you want to say that and you're going to do that, but I've got a file in my hand here. You would not want to get out.
I'm guessing Bill Barr can't wait to January 20th and just wants to go back to being a lawyer. That's my guess. But I could be wrong. They also could be planning it too. I have no idea. No. Let me explain that.
Yeah.
Let me explain that.
No, go ahead.
We've talked about it before. Bill Barr, a couple weeks after becoming Attorney General, gave a public speech at Notre Dame where he publicly said there are no ethics separate from faith. And what's destroying this country are secular people with no faith. That's what he said.
Unbelievably insulting and stupid.
It is so annoying, but it fits in with Leonard Leo. It fits in with that whole group. It fits in with the evangelicals and everything they do. So my dad made this point to me the other day. It was such a smart point.
Your dad is how old now?
91.
Why don't we get him on the show?
That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Why wouldn't we just tape a conversation with the three of us?
I think maybe we should. Let's talk more about that.
What did
my
he say?
Dad said that trying to ascribe the best motives to Bill Barr, let's assume this is not a political maneuver by Barr. He really believes in his heart that there's no goodness separate from faith. There's no ethics separate from faith. Well, then you can't reason. Then there's no more reasoning. Reasoning stops.
That's what your dad said?
Because his ultimate barometer is faith. If your ultimate barometer is faith, you can't argue faith. I can't tell someone God doesn't exist. I can't do that. You can't talk somebody out of faith. And you would hope that people, I don't have to hope it. There are millions of truly religious people who do not believe what Bill Barr said. Who do not believe that there's no ethics separate from faith. But once you believe that, then there's that your inspiration comes from above.
Is it possible that you're misunderstanding or misinterpreting Bill Barr? That there's no ethics separate from faith in that my secular ethics are rooted in.
Nope. Go read it. Go look at it. I've read it, looked at it, talked about it. Nope. He believes that. At least he said it. I don't know if he believes it. He said it.
It's a weird thing. It's the converse of that is not. I don't see that. I don't look at somebody who's a devout religious person and question their ethics. As a matter of fact, I would probably afford them even more respect. They're probably. Unfortunately, I would think, well, that person's probably an ethical person because that person, she lives by a code, which is a religion. I, as a secular person, I don't really have a strict code.
So I wish we were doing this by
I don't
Zoom or
steal.
something. You could see me raising my hand. I want to say something important about this. Let's hope that intelligent people, or even unintelligent people, will define people by what they do, not what they believe. Let's start right there. Because I don't care what you believe. I care what you do.
I love it.
And by the way, that's the basis of, in America, one of the great things about America is you can believe anything you want and the government can't tell you otherwise. What you don't have the right to do is do anything you want.
Right.
And I don't, so
what's an example of that? That sounds like something you've thought a lot about.
I'll tell you
how did you describe it? It's not what you say, it's what you do. That's the measure.
It's not what you believe, it's what you do. I mean, obviously. I mean, so I don't know what Bill Barr believes. I don't know if he's sincere or not. He shouldn't say it.
Well, he's a Catholic, right?
Well, I think he's part of that whole.
Yeah, but you can make assumptions about what he believes because he belongs to.
No, you can't. No, you can't. Let me tell you why you can't.
Okay.
Let me tell you why you can't. And this is important, what I'm about to say. Now I'm going to be I'm moody, but I'm serious. Mm-hmm. I have a colleague who told me something that changed my life. Because before I met you, I was even more anti-religious than you've seen me since you've known me, much more. But one conversation changed my life, seriously. So I have a colleague who worked for Obama and Clinton, both of them. My wife is screaming for me for some reason, for reasons that are just because she knows what I'm doing. It's very odd. Let's hope no one is dying.
Check on it.
Well, no, I'm not in her office, so I'm missing. Let me finish this. So my colleague is Catholic and is as liberal as they come, and is for gay rights, and he's against the death penalty, but he's for gay rights, and he's a feminist and all that stuff. And I once said I asked him, I said, how can you belong to this institution that has done, even leaving aside the child stuff, even leaving aside the molestation stuff. Today, this was 2001 or 2, we had this conversation. Today, women can't be priests. Today, women are second-class citizens in your church. And all the other terrible things that Christians, gays and lesbians, can't be priests and all that. I mean, gays can't be priests, all that stuff. And he said to me, you're right, and you're right, and you're right. And then he said, Eric, I could no more shed my Catholicism than I could shed my Americanism. My parents hated Richard Nixon, he said. I was too young. He said, I'm talking as if I was him. I was too young. But my parents hated Richard Nixon. They didn't give up on America. They want to make America better. I want to make my church better. I want to fight so that women can be priests. And I want to change my church's policies on gay and lesbian rights and same-sex marriage. But I can't give it up because it's part of who I am. I went to church every Sunday, and it's just part of who I it's just in my core. And that really affected me. I mean, and I, whether it justifies anything or not isn't the point.
That's interesting because, I've made that exact argument so many times, and I've never had someone give me that thoughtful answer he gave you. But my answer is, I split with you a little bit in the end of my argument when I say, because I understand that. I can no longer, I can't, this is what I grew up in. It does, I don't have the answer, and if someone listening does, I'd like to hear it. You can want to make your church better, but if you indoctrinate your, in this case, daughter, into that place, and you bring your daughter to that place every day, you are condoning that. You are role modeling that you belong to this group who sees her as inferior.
I can tell you how he did that with his daughter, because he has a daughter. He's an only child and has a daughter. No, I mean, basically, he exposed her to the good and the bad and tried to explain to her his view on why. He let her decide what she thought, but he absolutely shared his view of the Catholic Church does a lot of good things, Pete. I mean, they feed the poor all over the world.
There is no more patriarchal institution than the Catholic Church.
I agree.
And doing good things around the world in the name of religion
but they feed people who are dying. I mean,
because the penalty, the incentives and the penalties. Secular people who feed people who are dying don't do it because they're worried about burning in hell or going to heaven or being seen by their group.
If you're starving,
club.
you don't care why someone's giving.
Of course not. I'm not. And by the way, Christian organizations over.
How am I defending the Catholic Church? How am I doing
Christian
this?
organizations?
How'd you put me in a corner?
Well,
I'm defending the Catholic
Church. To finish my point, here's the thing that I would come back and I would love to talk to this man. Is he still with us?
Yes, but I don't know if he publicly talk about this.
Well, whatever. Then you go ask him and say, From ages 0 to 6 to 10, I can explain to my daughter, even though you don't see a woman up there on the altar, maybe you'll be the first one. I can explain that, or I cannot put her there to see it every Sunday.
Fair.
It's patriarchy.
No, I'm not gonna argue with you.
It's raising a daughter in a patriarchal institution because you have roots in it. I struggle with it. I struggle with it. I struggle with that. And if anybody listening has a good argument, I would absolutely like to hear it. I'm in listening mode.
Since we're talking about the Catholic Church, let's not talk about Justice Alito because he's not worth it. Can I unburden myself with a story I've never told publicly? I don't think. I mean, maybe I may have done it on your show, but I don't think so.
The exclusive. Maybe you should save it for your own show, not that you have your own show.
No. It's 1990. It's 1990. I am working for the United States Department of Justice. I may have told you this privately, under George Bush, the first. And I am defending a federal program, billions of dollars of money going to private religious schools. So Congress passed a law giving billions of dollars to public schools and private religious schools. And the constitutional question was, of course, the federal government can give money to public schools if they want to, and they can give money to private non-religious schools. But could the federal government give assistance like chalk and erasers and money to private religious schools? And the law said they had to, they had to be not-for-profit schools, but within certain parameters, if the money went to private non-religious schools, it had to go to private religious schools as well. So that was challenged by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, saying this law was unconstitutional.
Great nonprofit.
And it was my job to defend the law. At first I said, no, I wouldn't do it. And my boss said, come with me to San Francisco, that's what the case was, and see the schools that are getting the money. And if you don't want to carry on in the case, then you don't have to. But at least come see the schools. Because I was from Long Island, and I was thinking rich private. So I went to San Francisco, and I went to the schools. And they were in very bad parts of San Francisco. They were all poor, run by nuns, taking minority kids off the streets and trying to do something with them. And now, having said that, they were doing it through faith. I wouldn't vote for that law. Like, I don't think I would vote necessarily, but I was convinced it wasn't so clear. You know, my views on Supreme Court. I didn't think it was unconstitutional, so my job was to defend it. So I did. And the co-defendants in the case, because it's always money being funneled to these schools, the co-defendants were the U.S. Department of Education, my client, the Archdiocese of San Francisco, the state of San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, and the United States Catholic Conference came into the case as what we call in the law an intervener. An intervener is someone with a vested interest and isn't part of the original lawsuit, but comes in to participate. And the court had let the United States Catholic Conference come in. There was a guy named Charlie Wilson, who's now dead, who worked for Williams and Connolly, which is still one of the boutique litigation firms.
Not the congressman.
No, different Charlie Wilson. And Charlie was Justice Warren's law clerk. Charlie was a devout Catholic, and he was the lawyer for the United States Catholic Conference. That's a good gig to get. They pay very well, the United States Catholic Conference. But in any event, and your lawyer listeners will know Williams and Connolly. It's a huge law firm. Yeah. So he and I became friends. He was sadly kind of an alcoholic, but we became friends, and we would have to fly from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco 5 hours once a month for 3 years. And he was about 6'5". So he always tried to upgrade to first class. When he did, I wouldn't sit with him. But we spent many a flight when he couldn't upgrade. And so we probably spent 80 hours talking about Catholicism and homosexuality. His mother died in childbirth, something he never got over.
My God.
In any event, we became close. And so one of our trips there for a status conference, this story gets really sad, but important. So we go to San Francisco for one of our various hearings in the case. The case lasted a long time. And he said to me, and we were planning on having lunch, and he said to me, do you mind if the lawyer for the Archdiocese of San Francisco, who I knew a little bit, came along to our lunch? Lunch was going to be a social lunch. I said, sure, of course. He seems like a nice guy. So we go to lunch, three of us, in a very fancy restaurant in San Francisco. The lawyer for the Archdiocese of San Francisco also worked for a big law firm in San Francisco. And and we were talking about baseball and stuff because the earthquake was. Remember the San Francisco earthquake? I was there for.
During the World Series, '89.
Yeah. I was there that whole time period. Later, it was a little bit later than that, but I was there for that. But anyway, so we're talking baseball and everything, and it's a fine, friendly lunch. My friend did drink during that lunch, and he was an alcoholic. So as he drank, he started getting a little looser. And at one point, he said to the lawyer for the archdiocese, I have some business to talk to you about. Do you mind if we do it in front of Eric? Now, remember, I'm working for George Bush. Charlie knew my politics. He did. But this other guy didn't. But I think their assumption was I was like a moderate Democrat. I was working for Bush. So, that's how they viewed me. Mm-hmm. In any event, Pete, they started talking about a priest. And this was 1990-ish, 89 or 90-ish. And they started talking about a priest. And they had 3 agenda items: the amount, the non-disclosure, and the transfer. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really know what they were talking about. This is long before anything broke, about this story. And so I'm listening and I'm starting to get uncomfortable. And the first thing I hear is, I don't remember the number. They didn't say the number out loud as like 20 million. I think it was like 49 or 69. I didn't know what it meant, but it doesn't matter. And the guy said, yeah, that's done. And then Charlie said, and this guy kind of works for Charlie because Charlie is the lawyer for the U.S. Catholic Conference. He's the lawyer for a specific, Archdiocese of San Francisco. Then they talk about the non-disclosure. That's done. And there's some question about whether California law would allow it, and it would, and whatever. And then I stopped them and I say, guys, you really want to talk about this in front of me? Because this feels kind of sensitive. And, yeah, that's fine. Then I didn't know what was coming next. And then they started talking about Minnesota and how they're sending him to Minnesota, to this and that parish. And I said, Are you transferring this guy from whatever it is he's alleged to have done in San Francisco to Minnesota to be another parish? And I said, yeah, that's how. Yeah. I mean, he'll get some. This is the last sentence I remember. He'll get some help. And you know that have you seen the movie The Godfather?
No, but I've seen Spotlight.
That's very embarrassing. Al Pacino shoots a police officer.
Oh, I've seen Godfather. Yes, I've seen the movie Godfather. Sorry.
The scene where Al Pacino's in the restaurant and he's about to shoot McCluskey. Yeah. But then the Coppola does this thing where there's like a train going through Pacino's head and he can't hear or see anything. He's just so focused. That's how I went. I went off in my head. I was like, I don't understand this. What the fuck is happening here? And I said to Charlie, I got to go. I don't think it's appropriate for me to be here, and I don't want to hear any more about this. I don't mean to be rude, and I left. I left the lunch. We never talked about it again. Now I blame myself for that little following up, but I didn't know. But Pete, that's what happened all the fucking time, and I don't know how that's forgiven. I have to admit, that part of it, I don't know how that's forgiven. I mean,
we're talking about the Catholic Church, in case anybody's forgotten.
You had been out liberalizing me on this issue.
Well, so I think
that's traumatic. I called my wife that night crying.
Yeah, I get it. I think that's horrific.
It was, and I didn't know what to do, and then I just forgot. You know what, Pete? I just forgot about it. Like, how awful is that? Like, I went on with my life. I mean, I didn't know these.
Maybe that priest is still in Minnesota.
Well, I did. Yeah, hopefully he's dead by now because that was 1990, but who knows? Anyway, going to what we were talking about 30 minutes ago, I want to re-stress this. We can come up with on how we feel about, and I think there's lots of room for disagreement. How did this man get 70 million Americans to vote for him this time? How did he get so many millions to vote for him last time? We can talk about all of that. That doesn't excuse Leonard Leo.
Right.
It just doesn't. And so I think
many others that worked in the administration and knew the damage that was being done in so many different ways and to so many different people, and they knew it and they carried out the mission. Yes.
I think to make it as personal as I can for me, you know how much energy and sweat I have spilled on my unique, peculiar view about the Supreme Court. I feel strongly about it, Pete. I mean, I think this country is much worse off because of this institution.
Oh, yeah.
I would never support Donald Trump if he promised to do something about that.
Right.
I wouldn't.
Right. No, I get it.
And you know what's part of that? I really think I'm right, but I could be wrong.
I think that for me,
Leo doesn't think he can be wrong. That's the problem.
For me, the threshold would be climate change issue. Right. You know, if Donald Trump promised to do everything needed to be done, but he was still Donald Trump, would I support him?
Right. Would you?
I think it's a dumb hypothetical.
Say no, please.
Well, if you're going to save the planet, but you're going to kill 1 million people with a virus by looking the other way, you're still saving the vast majority of the species.
You know, that's not how I put it. So let me play law professor for 2 minutes.
I mean, like,
no, hold on. I wouldn't put it that way. Yeah. This is how I put it to you. You have your views on climate change and what to do about it.
Right.
I'm assuming, well, you've told me before, and I agree with you, you've convinced me on this. I've evolved. Reasonable people can't disagree about what scientists are saying about climate change, but we can reasonably disagree on what to do about it, right? I mean, we can't disagree about that. I mean, we have to do something.
Well, you know, around.
No, I mean, even if we have the best intentions, we want to stop this. I'm assuming the scientific world out there has different suggestions about what we do about this. No, am I wrong about that?
I mean, they're a complex set of suggestions, but they all point to, if I were to say a catch-all, reduce consumption.
I guess what I'm saying is you'd have to be so sure your views on climate change are so beyond argument that you're willing to let this monster get away with everything else to do what you want on climate change. I think climate change is different than the Supreme Court. It's much more important.
If he destroys the American experiment, if he destroys American culture, whatever is good of it, but the planet survives, I'm okay with that, because I don't think one country is more important than another country. And since America, is 5% of the population and uses 25% of the energy, like, we're responsible for a tremendous amount. So is China. So is India. So it doesn't, it's a way different hypothetical.
But wouldn't you do everything in your power to find someone who agrees with that, who's not Donald Trump? Because that's not what they did. That's not what they did.
Eric, there's about 329 million better people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. that would be able to do that.
They didn't do that. No. Those fuckers didn't do that. They could have put all their weight behind Ted Cruz. Look, Ted Cruz, unlike Trump, is a member of the fucking Federalist Society. Mm-hmm. Ted Cruz believes everything those people believe.
And he probably would have won.
And probably would have beaten Hillary. Yes.
Beaten Hillary.
They could have thrown all of their money. By the way, the last thing about Leonard Leo is, according to various news reports, you can Google this, about, I want to say in January of this year, he did step Federalist Society officially, because, although I don't think he's really stepped away, but officially he did, because he rounded up $80 million, or someone gave him a grant. He was a trustee of $80 million. And guess what that $80 million was for? Voter suppression.
What?
Yeah, look it up. I can't say this with certainty. I think a logical conclusion is many of these lawsuits that Trump is filing now are being funded by that $80 million.
Oh, so can you just tell me about that real quick? What happened in Pennsylvania yesterday? I know you want to talk about that, and then I'll let you go. So
all these lawyers on Twitter, law professors who I love and respect, were making fun of Giuliani because I think you know enough about constitutional law to understand this. So in constitutional law, when we review what the government does, we talk about what level of review the judges are going to give to it. So if the government discriminates on the basis of race, it has to have the most important interest, and it can't do it any other way. If the government's going to discriminate on the basis of gender, it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty darn close. If the government is going to put an obstacle between you and prayer or you and worship, not talking about selling widgets and Hobby Lobby, but you can't go to church on Sunday, they have to have an incredibly strong reason for that. And then that ratchets down depending on the issue. There's high scrutiny, middle scrutiny, and then something called rational basis scrutiny, which is what most laws get, which if a law has a reasonable purpose and its means are kind of related to it, then the judge is going to say, that's fine. We're not going to second guess that. We're judges. Giuliani didn't know anything about that yesterday. And it's like you learn con law 1 first day of law school. And the judge asked him about what level of review should be applied. And he was like, what are you talking about? I didn't know what he's talking about. But that and 25 other things, and no one understood what was, I think I'm going to corner the market on knowledge. No one understood why Giuliani was there. He wasn't there to win. They had no evidence. In all of these lawsuits, they've had no evidence. They've been thrown out.
Yeah.
All but
one for 26.
Yeah. All but one have been thrown out. And Giuliani had no evidence, had no facts. That wasn't why he was there. He was there to tell a narrative that Fox News would publish and that the people would listen to, because he's Rudy Giuliani. And
to get paid.
I don't know.
Apparently he wanted like $20,000 a day.
Well, maybe. Okay. But
if Leonard Leo's got $80 million to spend, he's spending it on lawyers.
Right. The strategy, when I was asked, did you ask me this? Someone asked me on a podcast. No, when someone on a podcast asked me, you're trying to make the best argument you can. And we talked about this.
You're what Siegel, you cut out for
you're
one.
Trump's lawyer. Give me the best argument. You're Donald Trump's lawyer. Hey, you're a law school professor.
Yeah, no, we did discuss that a bit. Yeah, go ahead.
I thought, and my answer was, well, he has no good arguments. But if I had to have one, which I don't believe in, but if I had to. So again, I don't believe this argument, but I think it's the strongest one. And by the way, my excellent law friend today told me the same thing. This would be his argument too. Is that the pandemic? I wouldn't argue fraud. I wouldn't argue bad faith like Trump is doing, because that's the only language Trump understands.
Right.
But what I would argue is the pandemic created havoc, which it did. Admit that the pandemic created havoc, and everybody tried their best. But the reality is, we've had more mail-in votes, more absentee voting, exponentially than we've ever had in any election in American history. And things, to no one's blame, got screwed up, and the results aren't reliable. And there's a federal statute that actually lets the state legislatures step in when an election is not certified in a certain way. I'm oversimplifying that, but it's good enough for now. And that argument that the result of the election wasn't reliable because of the pandemic is not a good argument. But it's not worse than Shelby County's argument.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, we got into the same thing. I would, I know it's not your argument, and I know you don't agree with it, but I just again on the premise, the pandemic didn't cause havoc, and it didn't create a mess.
But there's no evidence that it did.
No, I'll tell you why it didn't cause havoc, because it could have caused havoc, but hundreds of thousands of people working in state governments and volunteering all over the country to carry this election out, worked day and night, got training, and carried it out, and there were very few irregularities, and so it could have created havoc. But in fact, and the argument, by the way, is this is how we should be voting anyway, by mail.
100%. I'm just saying
it wasn't that hard to. Yeah, no, I know. It's not your argument. Last time I got pissy with you last time.
Well, I just want to say the Supreme Court has bought much worse arguments, and that's it. So my point is that's their strategy. So they have two strategies: create a national narrative separate from any kind of legal proceedings that that 70 million Americans will agree with. And by the way, I just saw a poll today, like half of Republicans think the election was stolen or something, some ridiculously big number. But then I think they're doing a Hail Mary to Supreme Court too. I think they think that maybe there are 5 votes there to do a Bush versus Gore. I don't think there are, but I think they think there's a chance.
That would say, I don't know what that would.
I'm serious about that. So Giuliani yesterday wasn't about anything having to do with that hearing. It was all about other things.
The Supreme Court can't overturn. What would they would overturn every single the entire election?
No, right. The problem is the remedy. The remedy is just impossible to figure out. What would they do? Oh, like how?
No, they wouldn't do any of that because
states pick the electors.
The Supreme Court wouldn't do anything. Because let me ask you something before I let you go.
Are we still on tape? Are we still doing this?
Yeah,
this is like 2 hours.
An hour and 11 minutes.
Okay.
I don't care. People want to. I think this has been fascinating. So, yesterday in Michigan, they almost threw out the votes of basically all of the black people in Detroit.
They were going to until social media caught up with them.
Well, until a bunch of people at that town meeting also caught up with them and named their names.
No, but then what happened? Didn't you see the video?
Yeah, that guy was in the town.
Facebook page. The guy had a horrible Facebook page.
The one of the electors.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
Awful. Yeah.
What do you mean? He had said terrible things on his Facebook page?
No. He had posted pictures of Obama in all kinds of terrible racist ways.
Oh, really? I had not heard about that.
Yeah.
Well, even worse then. So I have this weird, I want you to talk me off this ledge. At what point?
Go ahead. About 10 minutes to do it.
Well, just 2 minutes. At what point is violence okay?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Well, I think most of us would agree if your life is in threat, self-defense, your child's in threat, someone's being hurt, you actively intervene and fight back. Right. But the kind of violence, I mean, like as a result of a political act or... So
let me tell you, I can answer, I had this conversation with a very smart reporter on Friday at my paper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is our big paper in Atlanta.
Well, maybe I should finish, though, where I think was going last night. Before you tell me.
Violence. Oh, you think violence?
Well, listen, if you threw out the votes of all of the black people in Detroit...
Yeah.
I would not think it would be wrong for those black people to come and burn your fucking house down.
Well, I don't think they would burn the house. No, I think that'd be wrong. But I think that the protests would have to be extraordinarily severe. I agree with that. And maybe resort to violence. So the reporter asked me what would happen if it's not going to happen, he says. Not going to happen. But what would happen if the Georgia legislature overturned the election in Georgia and named Trump as the president from Georgia? And we both agreed that in Atlanta, Georgia, if that were to happen, there would be terrible violence. Whether it should be or not isn't the point. There would be.
I would be with them. I would be conducting violence, I think. I think I would. Yeah. I think I would. I would be like, you took my votes. And not just my vote, all of our votes. Yep. And that can never, ever be okay because this isn't about climate. This isn't about social policy. It's all of those things only come when you get a vote. If you're just going to kill our democracy and our state, we're going to be violent. I think that I support that in other countries, and I support it in ours. I think I do. And I never support violence ever. But I thought last night, if they were going to take those votes because they were racist, now we have proof, according to this Facebook page, of all the black people, I would have been like, are you kidding me? They would have been doxxed. Their addresses would have been put out.
Right.
I'm not saying kill people.
No. Hold on, my friend. No. I would never condone violence against those individuals. I would condone massive social unrest against government institutions. That's a different thing.
I don't know, man.
No.
Why not? They did
But once you head into vigilante justice, there isn't a whole lot of lines left. I mean, that's tough. That's rough. I think. Well,
at what point is war? Then why were Then you have to now say that American Marines that went into Iraq were not all war criminals for what they did, just by what they did on that. On anybody, not American Marines, anybody that goes into another country and fights their people for quote democracy. And you're saying we can't even in America fight for our own. We can't fight for our own, but we support it anywhere else. We're patriots if we go to other countries and fight their people for democracy. And murder them with sniper rifles and drop napalm on their houses.
I can't believe you're saying this. We have never gone into another country to help democracy.
We've never gone into another. Yes, that's what we've been told.
That's not true. I mean, you've been told that, but of course it's not true.
In every conflict, it was.
Let's pick up this conversation next time, right there. Right at that.
Wait, what are you laughing about? We've never gone. What was the Iraq War about?
You think we were fighting in Vietnam or Korea to save democracy?
To fight communism in both of those countries.
No, we're doing it. Oh, come on.
We're doing it what?
We're doing it for Pete. So in the 70s in South America, Chile and some other places, there were movements where there were going to be democratic socialist governments. In other words, the economy was going to be socialist, not free enterprise.
I know this history, but I want to hear your version of it.
Okay. My version is simply, we didn't care about the fact that these people were elected. That happened in Vietnam, by the way, too. We overturned a free and fair election in Vietnam, Pete. We
overturned free and fair elections all over the world. I'm saying,
not democracy.
I'm saying, is that not all worse than having your own vote in your own country taken away by your own neighbor? Is that not then a cause for violence?
you're switching subjects.
You can't erase people's votes. You can't take people's votes. And if you do take people's votes, I'm probably going to edit all this out. I think I can't imagine being violent.
I don't think you should edit that.
I can't imagine being violent, but I would have had I would not have been surprised. And I think this is the first time I've ever said this. In all my years, I would have supported violence if they overturned. There would have to be violence at some point just so you know, in a political movement.
I know you know this, so I'm not.
And I'm not saying target those two people individually, but
don't edit this out because this next thing is important. And then I must call them. I don't want to get divorced, which won't be a good idea.
Go.
For me, Pete, the history of this country denying people the right to vote on the basis of race. I mean, that's the history of this country.
I understand. I understand. And you have the right to fight for that too. But fighting and getting the right to vote, fighting all those people, all generations of civil rights warriors fought for the right to vote. They got the right to vote. They cast their vote, and then it was deleted.
Wait, would you have condoned violence against the people who gave black people literacy tests in 1963 in the Deep South? Okay, fair enough.
Fuck them up. Fuck them all up. Burn their fucking houses down.
Go. This was awesome. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about Alito, but you know what?
Next time.
He's not worth it. You can put that in there.
Thank you very much, sir.
Loved it. Thanks, man. Okay, bye.
All right, there goes Eric Segall. So if you heard that last part, tell me I'm absolutely crazy and tell me why I'm wrong. And I don't know. I don't work for a company anymore, so I'm hosting a conversation here with you guys, a whole bunch of other smart people, much smarter, more moral people who are role models to me. So you tell me what I've got wrong here. I'm just so fired up. I went from everybody calm down, they're not going to steal the vote, to burn their houses down if they take your right. You tell me. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'll also bring it up tonight at our Zoom hangout. That is tonight at 8 Eastern. And you can go to the Patreon page, patreon.com/Pete Dominic, to get the link. And I hope that I'll see you tonight. But that's all I've got for today. Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press, of course, Georgia State's Eric Segall just now, and all of you. Look forward to hear from you. We should just do an all-listener show, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we just do another one of those? It's been way too long since I did that. Who wants to be on, and what do you want to talk about? Thank you for your support. Thank you for joining me today. And if you haven't already signed up for a paid subscription, go do it now. Thank you very much. You're not alone. I'll see you on the Discord chat, and I'll see you tonight on Zoom. I love you. Goodbye.